Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Laura and I discussed the do's and don'ts of submitting resumes. We talked to Ryan McClean about scouts, trail building, and invasive plants. And finally, there are over 80,000 edible plants in the world, but 90% of what we eat comes from just 30 plants. Many are grown for speed rather than nutritional value. So we're actually also missing out on that respect. So we're only eating a tiny fraction of what's available, and a lot of it's not good for us. So maybe we need to get out of our comfort zones and try some new things. What do you think?
I got to try some new things when I was in Hawaii. Some good, some not so good.
Yes, I'm not saying that they all taste good, but some of them are probably good for you. How about that?
Yeah. I'm just good as long as someone else tells me they're edible. I'm not into the foraging my own stuff because I'll probably die. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. First to die. That would totally be me. Anyway, hit that music.
Today's episode is sponsored by the Stone and Holt Weeks Foundation, which is Ryan Hathaway's organization. Ryan was our guest from last week, and he very much believes in the spirit of paying it forward, so we thank him for the sponsorship. We also thought it was a really cool idea. The Stone and Holt Weeks Foundation exists to honor the memories and spirit of two brothers, remarkable young men who were tragically killed in a highway trucking crash in the summer of 2009. Through unbearable sorrow and unending love, the foundation has its mission to carry on the hopes and dreams of Stone and Holt in their spirits. By raising money for and creating awareness of, sponsoring participants in, and recognizing volunteers for their many good causes that they were involved with. Stone and Holt not only believed, but proved through their volunteerism and incredible vitality that you can do good and have fun at the same time. They both very much wanted to make the world a better place for all, and they each had the gift of making everything they did so much fun with creativity and originality. Do good, have fun, and make the world a better place for all. You can learn more at www.stoneandholtweeksfoundation.org. That's STONEANDHOLTWEEKS foundation.org. Let's get to our segment.
There's a screening process, and there are typically I would let the recruiter do what I did, but I wanted to do it for the show. Kind of like, I was like, let me like take a look at these and see, because I want to give people advice on how, like what I'm actually looking for when I'm trying to find a job.
I don't know. People will do that, what you're talking about, which is just like throw their hat in the ring without making improvements or doing anything before they'll bother looking for help. And it's really strange and frustrating for the hiring people. It's frustrating for the people themselves. But I hear a lot, like people will say, I applied for the job and I was qualified. I don't know why I didn't get called back. It's like, well, there's two things here. Like probably a handful of other people were qualified also. So that doesn't mean you're automatically getting selected. And that means you weren't doing anything to make yourself stand out. And secondly, maybe there's some mistake, like all the ones you're just mentioning, that you're not addressing.
Right. I mean, every resume you submit should be different. You should never have one resume. You should have like a template, a baseline, but every resume you apply should be a little bit different. Look at the job description, put some of that stuff in there. If you have descriptions of what I'm looking for in your application, I will consider it. It's that simple. You know, it doesn't have to be like, there's a balance between like content and, you know, ease of reading, right? You don't want it to be just this wall of text, because that's also very frustrating. And it makes you feel like you can't take the time to organize yourself on a paper. How can you do it anywhere else, right? But like, that's so simple to me. Use what you have in the description as a baseline for updating the basic resume you have. It's a simple piece of advice. It's amazing. Of all these 75 applications, like maybe 10, 15 of them actually seemed catered to what we were trying to look for. They weren't perfect, but like, I would say 5 of them were like exactly what we wanted, but 10 to 15 at least had what we were looking for.
Yeah. I won't respond to ones that don't address the company name specifically.
Oh.
Like if they're just like, I think this sounds like the perfect job for me. I'm like, meh.
Yeah. That's too funny.
That just means they're submitting the same thing to everyone. And mine says,
like a full-time job. That was my favorite.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard some, I don't do this. Like I've heard extreme things like, you know, you must include the word rainbow in your cover letter to be considered, just to make sure that you read the job description. I don't do that, but I do say, if you have not submitted, a cover letter, you won't be considered. So that knocks out most of them for me. Yeah. And then I only get qualified candidates who actually follow directions. I don't want to micromanage people, but I do want people who will follow directions. Like there are still policies that have to be, exactly. NEPA has directions that need to be followed. So that's not like, trying to be overly managerial or whatever,
It's the first step, right? You're trying to see, do you have the basic requirements of the job, which is to just be a little bit organized and follow a few directions. And if you can't do that,
Yeah. And I'm always telling people that, your resume is the first look someone has about you. Mm-hmm. So people think it's the interview. It's not the interview. Your goal with the resume is to get an interview, not to get a job. Right. So that's, number one. Your resume is to stand out, and everything you put on it is a representation of yourself. So when you say, I'm detail oriented, and then you don't have the same periods or non-periods, or you misspell things, no, you don't. and thank you for showing me that. I'm not going to hire you if I need someone who can write with attention to details, but can't even put it on something as important as their resume.
Right. Yeah. And especially for junior jobs, right? It does not have to be a one-to-one. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like we interviewed somebody yesterday who's very, very qualified, who does emergency environmental response. We don't do that at all. But this person is a very good candidate because of the interview that we had. The resume that they put together had a lot of the keywords we wanted. And so we decided to set up an interview, and it went really well. So it's one of those things too, that I don't want people to be discouraged. Just target it a little bit, because that person took the time and energy and effort to look at what we said and organized their resume for what we were doing. Even though I could tell the career lines weren't exactly what I want, it's close enough. And there's a lot of things that we can teach for junior staff that we don't have to really worry about as much. So it was really, 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 really well. You never know how the rest of them are going to go. But so I don't want to say, yes, this is the person, but it's really a top candidate. So I love that. I think that's really important for people to hear. I also really like to find relevant experience pretty easily. That's also kind of important for me. If I can't find it, if it's buried underneath the trip you took to Guatemala, that's not really helpful for me. But it happens a lot. People just don't seem to put the information in the right order, or just make it easy to see. I don't care if it's not, this is the exact same way every time. I just need to find, where is your experience? And if it's on page 2, that's a problem for me. I'm looking at page 1.
People are always like 1 page or 2 page. And I'm like, if you're not sold on 1 page, don't bother with 2 pages.
Right. Your first page should be the one. That's the one.
Yeah. And if you're going with 2 pages, all the best stuff on the first page.
Right.
Because regardless, you got to sell them on the first page. You're not flipping it over if you didn't like the first page. Let me see what else is here.
Yeah, exactly. It's just because there's so many applications, and if it's me or the recruiter trimming them, they're going to find a way to trim it. They need to trim, and you're giving them an excuse to. So that's okay, I have a bad first page, done. I don't have to worry about the rest.
Yeah. And a lot of times I see people say too much when they try to do 2 pages, especially entry level positions. You're putting in things that will get you removed instead of things that will get you selected for the interview. Because again, you're not trying to convince them to hire you at that point. You're trying to convince them to talk to you further.
Yeah, that's another really good point too. I don't mind that if you're a barista, or if you're working at a random job while you're trying to find other jobs, but you still, in that resume, I need to know that you still are interested in this field. You can even put it on there. I don't care if it's on there. I don't care. I'm a barista at this place. That's totally fine. But why would I interview you? What about you working there helps me determine that you're interested in this? That's where you really have to come up with, okay, well, I volunteer at this. I am doing continuing education here. Where are the things that are really telling me, hey, I am interested in this career field?
Yeah. I think sometimes people don't realize or forget that they are allowed to also put non-paid work on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Experience is experience. It doesn't matter if it's volunteer or
exactly
something you do for fun,
And if it's something that is relevant to what we're doing, all of them, please put it on there. I hope you do, So, yeah. And then I guess my last point, we had this happen as well, where somebody's applied for, we had a few times, right? Where it's entry-level position. Okay, great. That sounds great. I would like $80,000 a year. Sorry, what? No, that's not what this is. So do you have something else that could be? That's not what this is. You applied to the junior staff person. Like that's what this job is. That's what we're trying to hire for. We could have other things, but if you can't figure that out, I don't want to hire you. They're on our recruiting page. All the applications that we have are out there, or all the jobs that we have are out there. So yeah, that is not great. I do not like that one bit. I don't know. It almost feels sneaky to me or something. It's very strange. I'm like, if you don't want to do this, why are you wasting my time? So I don't know.
Yeah, but we do want people to get jobs. And it's too, there's, how many resumes do you see that are just god awful? And there's templates out there. And there's, Grammarly. There are things to help you with these. I
mean, yeah, it's a good point too, because like I said before, like there's a balance between like it looking good and it looking like too much. But you should always try to strive for, I'd rather it look a little glitzy and have exactly what I want than look terrible and have either it doesn't have what I want or it's buried. A good looking resume automatically pops up. There is somebody that I did have, obviously I'm like, this is a good looking resume, not quite what I'm looking for, but I know that there's other groups in our group that in our department that are, I'll send that to them. That does happen. And it's really like, oh, this resume is really good. It's just not for us. And yeah, I mean, it catches your eye. When stuff catches your eye, you're going to spend more time on it. That's just the truth. Right. That's a lot of good advice. I think we covered a lot of it. So let's get to our interview. Hello and welcome back to EPR. Today we have Ryan McClean, who is the Terrestrial Invasive Species Project Manager with the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference under the Lower Hudson Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management Contract on the show. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you so much for having me. Sorry, my name and title is such a mouthful.
I was about to say, I made it through in one take, so that's something. But Laura said she can't be here, but she did tell me about the passion you have for your work, which really started when you were a kid. So what were your experiences growing up that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, I was in the Cub Scouts from the minute I could. I spent a lot of time camping and hiking with the Cub Scouts, and I went into the Boy Scouts as well, got all the way up to my Eagle Scout. I learned a lot about all the different plants and organisms that surrounded me and really influenced my hobbies, my passions, just being outside all the time. And that's really why I went into studying ecology and environmental studies. I originally wanted to be a biology teacher, but after observing a traditional classroom in college, I kind of understood that was not really for me. That, I definitely consider myself an educator, but much more of a non-traditional. I really like being outside and engaging with people that really have that shared interest.
Yeah, and that's great because it's there's both of them are really wonderful jobs, but they're totally different. So it makes a ton of sense. Did you get into the Cub Scouts on a whim? Was it something you were like, I love being outside, I'm doing this? Like, was it just kind of what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I was 5 at the time. So don't really make a whole lot of decisions for yourself at that point. Yeah, definitely something that my parents put me into, and exploring different activities when I was a kid. I was never really into sports, and the Scouts is really what stuck with me. I was outside, I was socializing, I was exercising, but I was quite afraid of like baseballs and footballs hitting me in the face. So that's the route I stuck with.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So now you work with the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference. What do they do? What's their mission?
Yeah, so the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference has been around for over 100 years. It is a volunteer-powered organization. In fact, for the first 80 or so years, it was completely run by volunteers. And they build and maintain hiking trails in the New York and the New Jersey area. A lot of times people think that it is the park themselves that builds these trails and maintain them. That's typically not the case. We're there to add that extra capacity of helping build those trails, build them sustainably, so hopefully they'll be here for generations to come. and maintain them, cut down any of the fallen logs and remove them from the trail, cut back all the brush that's growing into the trail. And more recently, in the past 15 or so years, we also got into land stewardship. So that's where my team came in and the Lower Hudson Prism contract. So we deal with both terrestrial and aquatic invasive species with the Prism contract.
Yeah. So, okay. So you say it's volunteer run, or at least it was for a long time, and now you have it. It's a little bit different. So what kind of people are you looking for to kind of fill these jobs, and what jobs are there that are like those paid runs versus volunteer?
Yeah. So we have thousands of volunteers, and we really look for anybody that's looking to help out the environment, help out the hiking trails to fill that volunteer role. Typically, our volunteer base is a little bit older, people that have been volunteering with the Trail Conference for a long time. So what we're really looking for in terms of volunteers are people, one, that just love the environment and want to make that commitment, but we'd also love to get more youth involved. In terms of full-time positions at the Trail Conference, we have a lot of different positions available, from volunteer managers to cartographers, program managers. On the stewardship side of things, we have both aquatic and terrestrial invasive managers. We have the PRISM coordinator, education and outreach people. So really a wide breadth of backgrounds that we look for at the Trail Conference to fit these kind of niche needs for each individual program.
That's really, really cool. And I know it takes a lot of energy and effort. So when you do work with volunteer folks as well, are you working with Cub and Boy Scouts? Is that something you guys do, or is it more, like you said, those specific people you could reach out to?
Yeah, we do sometimes work with the Cub and the Boy Scouts. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap between what we're trying to do and their interests and their passions. So we do contact them. We let them know about our work days, and we love to have them come along. A lot of times, we also have corporate working groups come out, different organizations that want to have a volunteer work day. They'll come out with us to either remove invasives or help with trail maintenance. And we have over 2,500 volunteers that regularly help us.
That's awesome.
So yeah, the word really gets out there. We try and have work days in different parts of the region so that people can come out when they find out about our work days.
That's really, really cool. But you mentioned invasive plants. Let's talk about them. I know this is a huge part of your work, and your team focuses on early detection and rapid response. So what does that mean? What do you do?
Yeah, so we really focus on new invasive species to the region. The PRISM network has this prioritization system where each year we review all the invasives in the region and we categorize them into different tiers. So tier 1 are threat species, things that are invasive. We know they're invasive, but they're not here yet. So we're keeping our eye out for them. We've got the tier 2, which are emerging invasives. Those are new to the region. Tier 3, which are established. There's a bit more populations of them. And tier 4, which are widespread, things that are everywhere. And if you're local to the New York, New Jersey area, these are things like Japanese barberry, wineberry, oriental bittersweet, things that are just really prevalent on trailside, at trailheads. And we also have this tier M, which is the monitor kind of, we don't know if it's invasive, but it could be. So we're kind of looking to research that more and figure out where we're going to prioritize that. And so my team, early detection, rapid response, we have to put our blinders on to these widespread invasives. Obviously, there's a lot of merit in managing all invasives, but with the capacity that we have and with the goals that we have, we really focus on these high priority new invasives, with our goal being regional eradication. So we take a look at maps that are generated from data that is produced both by invasives managers, but also by citizen scientists and people just posting online. And we take a look at the distribution of where these invasives are located, how abundant they are, how likely they are to spread. And we target those really high priority ones. We do also work on protecting conservation targets as well. That's another one of our high priority goals. So we're talking about things like rare and endangered habitat or species. If they're being threatened by invasive species, it doesn't matter what tier those invasives are. I'll send my team to go manage that. Good example of that, we're working up at the Great Swamp in New York, and they have a calciferous limestone bedrock, which is not a very common type of bedrock and influences the characteristics of the soil, which also influences what plants grow there. So they have a bunch of rare plants there, and they also have New England cottontail, which is a species of rabbit that's native to the Northeast. There is a look-alike that is very hard to distinguish, but these rabbits like an earlier successional habitat. They don't like late growth forest. They prefer meadow to shrubland. So my crew helps them every year to remove those big invasive plants that grow to much bigger heights, don't provide a good food source for the rabbits, and try and reduce that successional habitat to be more suitable for the rabbit.
Yeah, and it's a great point because, people that are looking at that from the outside in, why bother managing for invasive plants? They're invasive, but who cares, right? And that's a great example of that. And I know what you're doing is kind of an uphill battle, right? So what is the main goal of what you're doing? Is it simply eradication, protection, and kind of how do you manage with the fact that it's an ongoing thing? This is not going to change. It's not going to stop.
Yeah, you're right. It definitely is an uphill battle, especially if you're working with those widespread invasives. The main goal of what we're doing is really to eradicate those new invasive species before they get a chance to get a foothold in the region and become as widespread as things like barberry and bittersweet, things that are everywhere. My job requires me to look decades into the future at the potential for these plants to really cover the region. So, of course, I would love for, after I remove a plant, for native plants to come in and there to be great biodiversity and flourishing a native community. But that is a secondary goal for our early detection rapid response program. Really, we need to get these high priority species out before they spread.
Yeah. So that sparks a question for me too. So with climate change and obviously as things become warmer plants can move further north. And so, I live in the South and kudzu, the vine that ate the South is here everywhere. And is that the kind of thing where you monitor how far north it's coming, like that kind of thing?
Yeah, we do. The vine that ate the South is actually nibbling at the north as well. So our team manages kudzu in New York as well. Wow. Yep. So that is something that I am very interested in, looking at expanding ranges of invasive species or species in general. Typically, we think of invasives as something from another country that does not belong here, that does really well and pushes out native biodiversity. But an invasive doesn't have to come from another country. It could come from another part of this country. So that's a very good point that, something that is native south of here could really push up and show aggressive invasive tendencies in different parts of the region. So We have a lot of different partners with the Lower Hudson Prism and the Prism network in general. So we have a lot of people that are boots on the ground. We have a lot of people that are doing research in academia. And so the people that are doing research in academia have their pulse on that and are letting us know, like, hey, watch out for this species. Keep your eye out. Like, this should be on your radar.
That's so cool to see the collaboration there, because, sometimes it's really hard to see that. You're like, oh, the researchers are over there doing their thing and we're over here doing our thing. So I'm really glad to hear that there's a collaborative effort. And I see that more and more as we go. And you have this, now that you're here too, I really want to talk about, like, you work in the field a lot. You have a lot of field crews. I'd love to ask you a few questions about that too. So you mentioned, for example, your team's been practicing crew swaps. So what is that, and how does that help you do what you do?
Yeah, so our crew is an AmeriCorps crew, part of the Trail Conference Conservation Corps. AmeriCorps is kind of like the Peace Corps, but here locally in America. There's a lot of different ways you could get into AmeriCorps, from like disaster relief to education, and we're on the environmental side of AmeriCorps. So our crews, we have the Terrestrial Invasive Strike Force, the Aquatics Invasive Strike Force, the Education and Outreach Trail Stewards, and Trail Builders. And so we really focus, especially because this is an AmeriCorps program, on professional and personal growth of our AmeriCorps members. We're trying to train the next generation of environmental leaders. It's often people's first steps right when they get out of college with a degree in ecology, environmental studies. But it can also be a really great way to switch into the field. If you feel really passionate about something, you're afforded a lot more wiggle room with your educational background when you're trying to get into an AmeriCorps program. So for us, there's a lot of overlap in the messaging that we're trying to put out there, and also just so much opportunity for growth and perspective change amongst the Corps members. So this is the first year that we've really sat down and mandated that each person has to be on every other crew at least one time, because there's just so much knowledge out there that can be passed on to other AmeriCorps members, to members of the public, friends and family, that if you don't get out with the crew members, you'll just never pick up on that information. It's really great to build their knowledge, but it's also a lot of fun for the AmeriCorps members. Our program, we have housing that we provide them in Harriman State Park at a retired Girl Scout camp. And they all get to know each other really well while they're living together. And so to be able to go out and see exactly what they do on a day-to-day, and to joke around with them and to have fun and to rip plants out of the ground, it's a great time all around.
Oh, that's awesome. I love this because it's almost exactly like what your parents did for you when you were younger, right? Like, you're going to try the Cub Scouts and some sports and we'll see what sticks. And that's how you kind of took your path. And it's kind of like doing that now for them as an adult, right? It's good to experience lots of different things so you can figure out what you like and what you're good at. But I also love that you said fun at work too, because it's really, really important. So what do you guys do? What are some of the things you do to ensure that not everything is a big grind, because it's hard work. It's not easy.
It is hard work. I always say that a happy worker is a productive worker. So I encourage my crews to take breaks as often as they need them. I have very high standards, so they know not to abuse that. Right. If it's real hot and you're sweating and you're pulling plants, of course you got to take a break.
Yeah.
They love to sing. Pretty much every year we've had crews singing parodies of songs related to the specific plant that they're working on that day. And we have a phrase on the Invasive Strike Force that everything is a competition.
Yes.
So every day we collect really rigorous data because it informs our management decisions. So I have them count every single plant that they pull. And so it's this competition amongst all of them to see who can pull the most plants that day.
Yeah.
And we also have this game at the end. How many plants, Price is Right rules. How many plants did we pull total for the day? And the one that gets the closest, they get a high five. They don't get any prize, but
right. Volunteer work. Understood.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool though, because I think it's really important, and it's like making me want to go out there with you right now. Like, I love that. So it also means though you have a lot of field stories, and we have a segment on our show called Field Notes where we love to hear about stories of people from the field, and we jokingly could write a field novel for, I'm sure, the ones that you have. But let's start with one of my personal favorites. I'd love to hear some of your stories about poison ivy.
Yeah, it's always a battle with poison ivy. It's a native plant, and it provides a lot of benefits to the local birds in the area that just love to eat the berries. So we avoid touching it as much as we can. But like I said, many of the crew members don't have a lot of experience when they start at this position. So they have a hard time figuring out what poison ivy looks like.
Oh my gosh.
When I was an AmeriCorps member myself, we were managing Oriental Bittersweet one day, and one of the interns that was with us picked up a plant, holding it real close to their face, and they're like, "Is this bittersweet?" And I'm like, "No, that's poison ivy." And so, of course, the poison ivy had touched their face, and they had a big rash on their face for a better part of the field season. And yeah, luckily it didn't scar. We're still friends, and she recovered nicely.
Yeah.
And this year too, I mean, when you're learning to identify plants, it's hard, right? Yeah, they're all green. They all have leaves. They look very similar. So for a lot of plants, it's more than just the visual. You have to feel them. You got to smell them. It's the whole picture. This year, our crew leader had a hard time learning what poison ivy looked like. Every time I pointed it out, she'd go up and she'd touch it with her hands, and I'm like, no! Don't touch that one. I thought you knew.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's pretty funny. And it's like, does it have like, it has like it can be like vine tendency type thing too, right? Where it grows up, and that also freaks me out. I can't handle that. That's too much. It's like, no, that's also poison ivy. What?
Yeah. It can grow on the ground, kind of like a normal, like a small shrub or something like that. But it does grow up trees. And when it's growing up trees like a vine, it has these long branches that can stick out and jet out into the trail. And unsuspecting people just going for a hike, their face brush up against a leaf. And no, that's just not any leaf. That's poison ivy.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. That's too funny. I mean, obviously there's dangerous plants, but like there's got to be there's two kinds, right? There's the ones like poison ivy, and then there's the ones like, brambleberry. And I don't even, just the name itself, thorns. That's all you have to know, right? You have to have some thorns experiences as well. I don't know if you have any good stories there, but.
Yeah. One time we were at a site, we were managing this plant, linden viburnum, of course, an ornamental escapee. And most of the site was covered by this horrible plant, Japanese barberry. I'll go a little bit more into the background of barberry just because it is horrible. I hate this plant. So the thorns are very thin, needle-like thorns that can puncture your skin, break off, cause infection. And because of how densely barberry grows, It's really a humid environment, like a microclimate underneath the barberry. And it also is great protection for mice and other little critters. So the mice, as well as the humid environment that's underneath the barberry, is a breeding ground for ticks. They just fester in there.
Oh.
Yeah, terrible. So we were managing this plant, Linden viburnum. It was a huge site. We must have scouted 50 acres that day. We all kind of started at a center point and went off into different directions. And the site was just covered with barberry as well. Hard to imagine how the Linden viburnum was growing there, but it did. And so this barberry is super thick, and it's hard to see your feet and what you're walking through. Of course, it's really hard to walk through unless you're wearing chaps. When you're wearing chaps, you can practically prance through the barberry, as we were that day.
Right, I was about to say, as you were.
Yeah.
As we are.
And so this thick barberry, I'm walking through, and all of a sudden, I look down, and there's a rattlesnake right at my feet.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, gosh.
And so, of course, we have these tailgate safety meetings at the beginning of every day. If you see something dangerous, tell somebody else, right? That's the rule of thumb. So I shout, we've got our walkie-talkie. I let people know, hey, I can't really tell you exactly where, but there's a rattlesnake near here. And throughout the course of the day, 2 other people on the team almost stepped on the same snake in the same spot.
Of course. Yeah, which is funny. It actually reminds me of another thing that's really important too, is like proper field gear, right? Like there's snake boots, and to a degree they help. There's not a whole lot you can do for rattlesnakes, but for walking through those brambles, you're talking about having chaps, or even like thick Carhartts are really important. Something like that to keep you from getting ripped to shreds, right? But I know this has to happen to you. Like, I'll give you my example, and I'd love to hear a story of yours, right? You tell people, hey, this is what you should wear, right? And say I'm going to a salt marsh, and I'm like, hey, this is going to be really muddy. You need muck boots, and you need, quick dry clothes and all this other stuff. And I had somebody, I told this to their face, hey, this is what you need. They showed up, white t-shirt, shorts, brand new white sneakers.
Oh, no.
Like, I have to send that person home. That has to happen to you too, though, right? Do you have that?
It does. Of course, I've been doing this for a few years now. I know what PPE, personal protective equipment, we need at every single site. One example is our largest giant hogweed site in the region. Giant hogweed is this nasty plant that has sap that can burn your skin if it gets on you and is exposed to sunlight. And if the sap gets in your eyes, it can blind you as well. So we're on this partnership with the DEC to eradicate giant hogweed in the lower Hudson. And we're actually getting fairly close. We've got about 75% of our sites, no plants found. But this one site has thousands of giant hogweed growing all along this kind of windy stream that has shallow parts and has deep parts. And I learned myself back in 2017 when I was a Corps member that tall boots, waterproof muck boots, are really necessary for this site, because I was scrambling up the bank of the stream and I lost my footing. I put my foot in the water and walked around with wet feet all day. I mean, it's the worst.
It's the worst. It totally is the worst. That's exactly what I was going to say.
And so every year, without fail, I tell my crew, you need to have tall muck boots to get through this site. And every year, without fail, somebody forgets the tall muck boots. And one year, we had somebody that had sneakers on, and they took plastic grocery bags and tied them around their feet.
Did that work?
No,
Okay.
Of course not.
That was so quick. No. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's great. Like I say, I could spend all day talking field stories with you because I know you've got so many, but we also love asking folks like what your hobbies are. We have these day jobs in the environmental field, but we also like to have fun. We enjoy. And, you have several. You and I both really like cooking, it seems. So that's a pretty awesome thing. What got you into that? Why do you like that so much? And what do you make?
Yeah, I've always loved food. I'm a bit of a foodie. And when I was a kid, cable TV, Food Network was on all the time.
Yeah,
I loved Chopped. That was my go-to show.
Right.
And so when I started living on my own in college, my parents weren't there to cook for me anymore, and dining hall food is not exactly the most scrumptious. Yeah. So I really started to dive into cooking myself. I recently have been really trying to master chicken marsala, which is a labor of love. I mean, you really gotta be very involved in the kitchen for, anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. But getting to that end product and sharing it with my partner, sharing it with our roommate, and watching their face as they're eating, it's just well worth all the time that I put into it. I'm also a beginner forager as well. So definitely want to put a caveat in there if you do get into foraging. One, know what is what. Do not pull something out if you don't know what it is.
Yes.
Definitely have a checklist for ID features. Two, know where you can take things from. And three, forage sustainably. Never take more than like 20% of a population of something. So I've found things like chicken of the woods. I found morels. I found ramps. I like to forage wineberries. They're an invasive in the region, but they're quite tasty.
I won't tell anybody.
Yeah. So I've made sorbet from wineberry, and I've made a lemon balm simple syrup to help flavor that. I've cooked up chicken of the woods by, frying it just like you would fried chicken. I've made teas from all sorts of plants like mugwort and sassafras and sweet fern. So yeah, I love food and I love cooking, and tying nature into that, foraging a little bit here and there is great fun.
That's really cool, and I say it ties into your love of hiking as well. And I'm sure you have a couple of good hiking stories for us too. You want to share one with us before we let you go?
Sure, yeah. So there's this really cool spot in a state park near me that has a retired shooting range there. And it's quite expansive with a lot of concrete walls and tunnels and buildings. And the entirety of all of the concrete structures are covered with graffiti art. And I'm by no means an advocate of graffitiing out in the woods. I see graffiti on rocks and on trees, and that's no good. But on this concrete structure, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love to check that spot out. Love to bring my friends there, and the tunnels are subterraneous, so they're not completely underground. And there's these little slat windows to let some light in. So it's very, very dingy and damp in these tunnels. And there are an abundance of cave crickets and like huge spiders in them.
So wait, Ryan, are your friends like, where did you bring me? Is this our last day on Earth? What's happening? That's
I'm often asked, did you bring me here to kill me?
Right.
Part of the fun. Cave cricket dropping on your face.
Yeah, who doesn't love that?
Yeah.
That's so great. And like I say, we've had a great time with you. I know we're almost out of time, but is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we let you go?
Yeah. I would just say that most invasive plants and animals come from ornamental escapees from your garden, from the pet trade industry. So really do your research before you purchase something. And if you do, it's never too late to remove it, properly dispose of it, and replace it with something native. That's the biggest way that individuals can help out, is to plant native on their properties, help the wildlife, help biodiversity thrive, and get out there. Look for volunteer opportunities. There are plenty of people that are out there trying to protect nature, and they need your help. So try and get out there and protect the land that we love.
Oh, it's a brilliant message to end on. Thank you so much for being here. Before last but not least, where can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is Ryan L. McClean, and the link for that would be Ryan L.G. McClean, and that's RyanLGMCClean.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here, Ryan.
It was great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
And that's our show. Thank you, Ryan, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody.
Bye.